Back into it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Read Between the Lines, your weekly podcast that goes into behind the words and between the lines of some of our favorite books and authors. I'm your host, Drake Shadwell, and joined every week, as always, is Sidney Key. Hey, Sidney, go ahead and say hello.
What's up, man? How's it going? I'm excited to get some Golden Sun.
It's going pretty well. This week, we are diving into Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. This is the sequel in the Red Rising series. I am really excited because this week I really did a deep dive after reading the first half of the book, going into some of the details of what gave him inspiration, what made him want to be a writer, and that kind of information really changes the book for you. I have to give props to where I got the idea from was actually Austin. Remember that time Austin came into the chat and started talking about all the cool things about Name of the Wind and Patrick Rothfuss?
Yes, it's a meta conversation.
Yeah, when after that, it gave me the idea to, maybe that would be a really great thing. And I started off on Wikipedia and then just went down the rabbit hole of just watching videos of Pierce Brown. And the man is an insane genius. Like, the amount that he reads is just phenomenal. I was blown away by how impacted he is by reading and how much time he spends reading. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised. He's an incredible author, but the kinds of books that he reads was very impressive, and I'm excited to talk about it this week. You know what, Sidney, why don't you go ahead and confess? Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody? We got actually a couple more people in here that don't know. Can you let everybody know your transgression this week of
my sin?
Your sin?
Yeah, I read the whole book. It's irresistible.
So I guess over the course of 3 days, is that what I'm understanding? Is that it was over the course of 3 days?
Yeah.
So you read the 50%. You're like, I'm gonna be good. I'm gonna stop. You gave it a day, and you just couldn't go read another book. You couldn't go. You talked to me so much about how you have so much reading to do, and you just couldn't.
Dude, well, the other book I'm reading is delicious, though. To be clear. But what's
the other book that you're reading?
The Overstory. Oh my gosh, man! By who's it by?
Is that another fiction book? I thought you were reading nonfiction on the side. Are you double dipping here?
I am. This is high fiction, like Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, so you're calling the books that I read low? Oh, that hurts. Though actually, Pierce Brown does have a comment about that because his books are often qualified as young adult fiction, and I loved. He said something about how young adult. All that means is that there's something interesting happening in every chapter. That's what defines young adult.
That's a damn good point. This is why I couldn't put down Golden Sun and pick up the Overstory instead. Because he does an incredible job with it.
Why don't you, before I get down the rabbit hole of Pierce Brown, for all of our fiction fanatics, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about either your favorite part or something that stood out to you about Golden Sun, like just the first thing that comes off of your head. Go ahead and tell us like what jumped out at you that made you want to power through this book, that kept you interested. Either it can be one scene, it can be an overarching thing, like just whatever jumps off your head.
The scale of the book did for sure. Because Pierce Brown does such a good job of adequately describing the scale of what's going on, like to the planetary, like solar system level, but still keeping the person-to-person, he's walking down a hallway scenes relevant and intriguing.
Can you give me go ahead and give me one example from the book?
Of like what?
Of that scale.
Oh, I mean, wait, I have to check and see where half the book is.
Wait, what?
I have to check and see where half the book is.
Oh, because you don't want to spoil the second half. Look at that. Looking out for the rest of us. I appreciate that.
Tell me where you stopped. Because I have a book, right? I wasn't reading it on Kindle. So.
Okay, so we stopped right after Darrow takes over the he ends up renaming it the Pax. It was known as the Vanguard. Right? Oh, that was such talk about examples of him it's another version of him changing the paradigm, and but a completely on a bigger scale. Like you can't argue with that.
So good.
Yeah, because I completely agree, actually. That's a word that I often use when describing why I like this book so much, is the word scale. He takes this book, Red Rising, that was incredible. That was in its own right incredible. but it was, he even described it in his own words, and a lot of editors told him, derivative. We had a lot of those similar battle royales going on, and he had that same, he got the idea, not the idea, but we've heard that kind of story before. Golden Sun's different. It's a different story. It's a completely new beast because it doesn't follow any format. It just takes these characters in this world and then, you know, Pierce Brown does what he does best. He uses some of the most elevated language and incredible military tactics to just give these crazy twists and turns in these battles that I don't think anyone ever really sees coming. Like, he turns the game on its head every time, while also offering for moments in these giant military battles to have these tender moments between each character without them feeling overdone, and getting you attached to the characters in a way that I love. I mean, we'll talk about Tactus right there at the end, at least at the 50% mark, I know at the end of the book, but that heart-wrenching moment where you realize Tactus isn't on Darrow's side, and Darrow chooses, and it's despicable. Like, you wanted him to be with Darrow. You wanted him to be on his side. You wanted Darrow to have that, like, his friends from the Institute, and Tactus was one of them.
Mm-hmm. Especially because at the beginning of this book, it's such a drastic departure from Red Sun that any of the names you know, you kind of grasp. You're like, I know this character. I want them to stick around. So when Tactus bounces out, it's a lot more impactful than it would be if someone you just met in this book leaves.
And that's a great point right there of Tactus, we only know a certain amount of names and grasping to names that we do know, because all of a sudden we're thrown these names like Carnus Albalona, I think Victra's new because she's Antonia's sister, all these different people out of nowhere, and you kind of grasp these names of, I remember them, but we're 2.5 years later and we've skipped. I'm so
You're talking about him, this book, Red Sun potentially being derivative of what was going on at that point, right? And if he had done Golden Sun, where it starts at the Academy, the Academy, the 2.5 years there, is what you expect to follow up the Battle Royale.
You're saying exactly what I was trying to. You're exactly right.
It's exactly what you expect. You're like, all right, he beat some ass in this Battle Royale, and now he's going to beat some ass in the social version of the Battle Royale. That's what you expect to happen. And then you get there, and he's like, actually, I think within like 3 paragraphs or something, 2 years later, 2.5 years, just like that.
He completely skips over a giant chunk of content that could have been great, but would have trapped him into the pattern that I hate to call her out, but like the Katniss books, the Hunger Games series, they get stuck in that pattern of, okay, we found a formula, let's stick to it, and Pierce Brown doesn't do that.
Divergent. You have all those books. Mm-hmm.
Pierce Brown chooses not to do that at all. It's a completely different book. It does not rely on the formula that the first book was so successful on, and I think the charts rewarded him for it. This book was, I think, number 13 on the bestsellers list when it came out. The next book, Morningstar, was number 5, and I'll let you know that he doesn't go back to the formula. Like, he doesn't. It just grows and grows, and the story, this is what I found when I was researching Pierce Brown, was he is regarded as one of the best plot-driven story writers of our time. That he writes good characters, they're instrumental to the plot. Yes. I mean, who doesn't love Severo? Who doesn't want to spend a day hanging out with Severo? Like, come on, let's be real.
I don't. He sounds like an ass.
Exactly. That's why I want to hang out with him. I think it would be a day that I wouldn't want to repeat, but I'd never forget. And but in addition to the characters and everything, he's regarded as one of the best plot writers of our time. Because, I mean, think about the amazing plot that we get from him. I mean, the unexpected nature of it, but it still feels natural. And he somehow manages to not make you expect the unexpected. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of books are like, okay, I know my author, I know they're gonna pull something, like, I'm ready for it. No, not with Pierce Brown. Every time I'm blindsided. He's strapping himself into a star shell and shooting into the ship deck. Like, but I didn't see that coming.
He did give you a preview of it happening,
and I still didn't see it coming.
There you go.
Yeah. So, we'll circle back to the plot. So I think that was a good little taste of why we love this book. What created this book, what gave impetus to this book, and this series is really exciting to me. Pierce Brown talks a lot about the inspiration for Red Rising came while he was driving to the mountains while reading Antigone. And Antigone is actually the inspiration for Io. So the wife of Darrow, who was hung and became the martyr and is actually kind of the symbol of the rebellion that Darrow now is trying to create, she was inspired by Antigone. Io came before Darrow. Pierce Brown had the idea of this amazing female character, how she sacrifices herself, and he has the thought of, well, what if there was a man who loved Antigone? What would his reaction be to what they did to her? And that is how Darrow was born. And he got all this inspiration on a drive up to the mountains. And Sidney, do you want to guess how long it took him to read this book? I mean, not to read this book, to write this book.
Probably something stupid, dude.
Yeah,
something
it is.
Dumb.
It is.
How long did it take him?
It took him 2 months. He wrote Red Rising,
Christ.
the first book in the series. Golden Sun took him longer, but he wrote Red Rising in 2 months.
That's obscene.
Obscene. Like, absolutely. Some people, he mentions, he's like, I wish I could approach the rest of my writing projects with that frenetic speed, but I cannot. It's much slower. People actually asked him, they're like, because, the writers are always looking for inspiration, and it's hard when you kind of get stuck on the first draft, and you compare your first draft to someone's final. And he's been asked about that, like, would you be willing to share some of your work, your pre-work, your first drafts, your rough drafts? And he said, absolutely not. he called it too much of seeing how the sausage gets made. And he kind of said, like, just don't compare your first draft to my final. Like, that's one thing. But he doesn't want people to know how frenetic his writing process is, and also he feels it would take away from some of that finished product from knowing where it came from and knowing what might have been and what could have been. And I kind of agree with that. Like, think about knowing. I don't know. What do you think about that of an author not wanting to show their...
I think he said it pretty freaking accurately when he says seeing how the sausage is made. You watch how sausage gets made, and you don't want to eat the sausage. Like, it just makes you appreciate it less.
I can agree with that. And there's something about that polish. Like, sometimes you don't want to take away that polish. Sometimes it's what kind of makes that diamond shine. And
I mean, what's the saying? Rose tinted glass or whatever?
Yeah, well, I think that's seeing the world through rose tinted glasses is just...
Well, yeah, so I choose to see this book through a lens that I feel from having read its finished book.
Yeah, and Pierce Brown agrees with you. And he, I think his exact words were, his first response was, "You wish." So I don't think we'll be getting...
I think even to an extreme degree, but even investigating the writing process, it's a very different kind of enjoyment than reading a book. Because reading a book, you're consuming it, right? And then you learn about the writing process, and you're appreciating it.
Yeah.
Which is two fundamentally different things. And
how do you feel about this, us moving more towards that, of having this part of book club where we do talk more about the author's process and decisions and things that inspirations?
I like it.
I'm excited about it. I think it'll be good for when we do read only 50%. So that 50% week, we get a taste of the plot, but the bulk of what we talk about is, okay, between the lines, behind the words, what created this book? What gave us this beautiful nugget this polished product that we now get to read? How did it come to being? And have you ever read Antigone?
Is that something you read in high school?
Yeah, it's Shakespeare. Whoa, no. Yeah. Oh, it's not Shakespeare. Oh, man, I'm going to get ripped to shreds for that one. It's not Shakespeare. It's Greek.
Hey, Drake, you want to tell the audience
no.
what your major was in college?
Don't do this to me, Sidney. Oh, how did you call me out like that?
What did you get? What did you get a very nice scholarship to a very nice school for the entirety of your undergrad career?
I graduated in the study of plays. And I just called Antigone Shakespeare. I don't know who wrote Antigone. I'm pretty sure it's one of those. It's one of those Greek tragedies. Who wrote Antigone? Do you know anything about Antigone? The story of Antigone?
I'm sure I did at one point.
Oh Lord, you're gonna put it on me to try and remember this.
Yes.
Yeah, it is Sophocles. Okay, it is Sophocles. I was about to say Sophocles, but I pulled myself because I already embarrassed myself with the Shakespeare. So please, chat, and anyone who watches this, don't tear me to shreds for what I'm about to say. But this quick synopsis of Antigone that's important to the inspiration is that Antigone's father lost a war, and the people who conquered him refused to bury his bones. They wanted him to be eaten by wolves and torn to shreds, and didn't want to give him a grateful burial. And Antigone opposed the king, and was then this whole debate ensued. And it evolved beyond just you're disgracing my father's bones. It was more of you're not a good leader at all. Like, you shouldn't lead us. And this was kind of the impetus for her to make her arguments in front of everyone. And she was eventually killed for opposing him. And so Pierce Brown was reading the story and thought, what would her loved ones say? What would her loved ones think? And the answer was Darrow. Darrow, add 7,000 years of genetic manipulation and the development of the human race, and you got Darrow as the response to Antigone's death. So I love the idea that EO came first. When Pierce Brown wrote this book, EO came first. Like, doesn't that just kind of feel kind of right?
I love how important she is, but how little actual story time she has. But she came first. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Can you think of any others? Well, and take Patrick Rothfuss. This is the sign of a really good writer, a really good fantasy writer, is that essentially the story you read is actually just a small snapshot of a larger world and the characters that the author knows so much about and has so much half-written story about that it creates this frayed web network around the story that you know. Like, the story you know is the web, the spider web that you see, but there's so much more reaching out, and then there's the trees that the little frayed edges of the spider web are attached to. And that's how I imagine the world that Pierce Brown's created, is that he has all of these other characters that have all these backgrounds, and like EO having all of this origin story in Antigone, and you don't need it, but it has to be there to be that support and hold up this beautiful web that we get to see. I love it. I absolutely love it. Do you wanna say anything more about Antigone or EO, or take this chance to say anything what you think about EO?
I like EO. Where have you learned that horrible news?
We've learned it. We've learned it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oof.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You can go into it.
EO is pregnant when she gets killed. Or more accurately, when she gets killed, but she sacrifices herself to get killed. Man, some rough stuff. And Harmony blatantly manipulates Darrow using that knowledge.
Yeah, carved Darrow.
And you don't find out in this half of the book how horrible that could have been.
Yeah. Wait, are you talking about if he followed through with her plan? Actually, yeah. I don't remember. You find out how bad it would have been if he'd actually gone through with it?
Well, just read it.
We'll read it. We'll read it. We've got 2 weeks to read it. Okay, I'm excited because I don't remember that. I've read Gold. This is why I love rereading books, because especially these. I remember reading through them so fast that I don't remember some of those details like that you're talking about. So
there's a kind of enjoyment you get from inhaling a book. You get something from inhaling a book that you don't get from taking small bites, but you also miss stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm taking the time this time to go through slowly. I'm so glad you loved it. I'm so glad you inhaled it. Another thing I want to talk about with Pierce Brown is talk about inhaling books, his voracious reading style. Like, the books that he'll list off about what he reads, they're the books that I like push myself to read, and I can't get myself to do it because they do take incredible amounts of patience to get through, and I'm just not a patient person. He reads military history, he reads military strategy, he reads historical fiction. He said historical fiction is his favorite genre, or at least it's the genre that if he could only read one genre for the rest of his life, what would he read? His answer was historical fiction. And that vicious reading ability, it obviously influences his writing. His elevated word style, like his elevated vocabulary, his military stratagems that absolutely work their way into both Red Rising and Golden Sun. The kind of thing, someone commented on it, they were like, are you reading The Art of War? Like, is that how you're getting these ideas? And he goes, well, no, I just read, he reads tons of military strategy, and that background has got to be incredibly helpful for writing these books.
Have you read anything about what Napoleon did?
No, what do you mean?
Napoleon upended like battle tactics during that time period where he was like conquering everything. Like it was absolutely. You should read some of the accounts of some of these battles.
Did he? Why do you bring up Napoleon here?
It's a military history I've read.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't think he wrote The Art of War, did he?
No.
That's why I thought you were bringing that up. Oh, I'll have to try. I bet you.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Pierce Brown suggested like 4 or 5 books. Like he was asked different questions, like what book should everyone read? What's your favorite book? Like they were like differently phrased. Like give us books to read, and he listed off like 3 or 4 or 5, and every one of them I was like, oh, that's a great book. I need to read that book. Oh, I should really read that book. That's like Ender's Game was one of them, and another one was what was it called? It's The Search of Meaning. It's like search of man's search for existence, man's search for meaning. I think. Hold on, I've actually read this one. Yeah, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and I was like, now I understand why. Like a lot of like the Red Rising. I understand why he's such a genius. He reads all these books and he just absorbs it like nothing I've ever seen, and then he use his writing is his sanctuary, is his expression, and so he absorbs all of this information, wraps it up in his beautiful universe that he's created, and then delivers it in a very polished product. And I am so thankful that he has that patience and that drive to read books at an unbelievable pace. Like he has to. I would love to just see his Goodreads history. You know what I mean? Like just see all the books that like the shelf, like have a library of just what Pierce Brown has read and go behind him and read it and watch as characters from the books that he's read pop up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Motivations and stuff show up in his books.
Exactly. Now, one more. I want to talk about one more thing before we go back into talking a little bit about things we loved from Golden Sun. And this is I think this will be a good stepping off point into what I want people to think about while they're reading these upcoming weeks. Is so Pierce Brown intentionally includes Roman culture, not just because he thinks it's cool or like it's neat to have like this reference to Roman culture. He does it because he thinks that society shows so much how we praise these wonderful developments that happened in Roman culture, this empire that was created. The Roman Empire is held up as one of the greatest empires of our time, but it was also built on the backs of slaves, and that's not often, it's mentioned, but it's not often focused. Of these achievements were only achievable through the use of terrible tactics and slave labor and in building on the backs of those less fortunate, which is exactly what the Gold Society is built on. And so that is why the names, the places, everything is very Roman derive from Rome. And later you'll learn about the Rim, which are like planets that are even farther away from like the farthest ones that have been terraformed, and it's really cool because like they're so far away it's hard to control them, just like it's really cool. But that's not for much later. So the Roman culture was very specifically chosen, and a lot of the names are specifically chosen. Like Bellona is the goddess of war, and that's the name of Cassius's family. Victra is the I think the names often do intentionally mean something, which I think is really cool. But most importantly, and what I want us to talk about right now and kind of give us something to think about while we're reading, or the rest of us are reading because Sydney already read everything. But
I can reread.
You can reread, and I think it's important to go back and think about this because it's what Pierce Brown wanted us to think about when reading this book, and in light of how we view the Roman culture. What is more important, the success of our species or the equality of it? That is why that view into Roman culture, that view into the idea that this incredible empire, the one that we laud as quite incredible, we view it through this rose-tinted glasses, was built on the backs of inequality and slave labor. So the Gold Society has done the same, and they have achieved great heights. Their cities are fantastic. They have conquered planets. They are at the peak of both genetic and technological superiority. Like, they've made incredible advancements, but all at the cost of equality. And I don't think it's a fair question to say what is better, success or equality, because I think we all know the answer to that is like it's very. I mean, I know my opinion on that answer. For me, it's more of how can we balance that, or maybe even do we think that humanity will make the right choice? Like, did my question get lost? Did the whole thing get lost in my own explanation?
No. You gave it a good bookend.
Yeah. No. So Squid, we've talked about this actually quite a bit with Sapiens. So I'm asking us to kind of revisit it with the focal point of Pierce Brown's, I guess, analogy, or like his very elaborate narrative that lets you think about this question. Where are you coming in on it? How do you feel we're doing? How do you feel about sacrificing equality in order to make these grand strides that the Gold Society has made?
I think there's a balance point, because the whole point of progression in my head is to improve the average human experience. There's no objective achievement for humanity, right? The only achievement that humans can actually search for is subjective pleasure. So the best way to measure long-term human success is average human equality.
So,
in my personal arrangement.
So what if that means sacrificing human innovation or progress? Like sending people to Mars even though it's dangerous. Sending essentially colonists to another planet when we know that their life and their generation of their next lives are not going to be as, I won't say as good, as comfortable. Comfortable is definitely a word that I can use confidently.
So the subjective experience I think is important to think about, but not necessarily the subjective experience of people currently alive, if that makes sense.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so if you're going to send a colony to Mars to pursue technical liberation and growth and all those shenanigans, they're going to have a shitty time. But if for every one person you send to Mars to reduce, that ends up reducing broad form human equality. If you end up producing more equality for 3 people later on, then you come out ahead.
It's tough because it's why I stop myself from saying their lives aren't going to be as good. Because kind of what you talked about, it's subjective. That subjective goal of pleasure. But those people have very strong purpose. So especially people who would choose to go and colonize Mars, those are going to the people that want to be that they want that to be their purpose, and then they're being given that opportunity and they have a definitive strong purpose. I think people.
That's why the Reds are so good with mining, so content with it, because they're told they're there to terraform Mars for the good of humanity.
Yeah, they were given a definite purpose.
They have a purpose.
Yeah. And I actually want to mention that, I just really want to take a moment to talk. There's this quote in the book about how reds are similar to golds, and I started thinking about it. I can't remember who. I mean, I'm sure it had to be Darrow. No one other gold would ever dare say something like that. But I started thinking about it, and yeah, reds are at the bottom of the pyramid, but they are the closest to golds when you think about it. Maybe obsidians. But like when you compare blues or yellows or like those people, their mindset is so much different than golds. The only thing that really separates golds and reds are their physical form. The reds have that conqueror spirit, that explorer spirit, that leader spirit, because they had to. They were sent to colonize Mars. So, doorbell. So they have the mentality of a gold. They have the mental strength of a gold, but not the body. Whereas a lot of the other colors, they've been pruned, grown to be. The best example I can do is think of as the blues. They are so mentally different than the golds or the reds or any other people. Like they've been programmed to be programs. They've been programmed to be essentially supercomputers, and they could not be gold. Like Darrow is able to be a gold now that his body has become gold. But
I don't know if I agree super strongly about that, because the story is told through a red lens, right? Mm-hmm. And so all the other colors that he interacts with, they're interacting with them in their color role, right? And so naturally you're going to see them as mostly their role. So I wouldn't say that we've seen evidence to discredit what you're saying, but I'm just saying we haven't seen stuff to actually support it. That makes sense. Because every other color, I'm trying to think if there's, but you have the is it the pink of that helps Darrow out?
Mm-hmm. Theodora.
You have the blue, which is the captain of the ship.
Mm-hmm. I was actually trying to think of examples where they were a little more like gold.
You don't have very many humanized non-red or gold characters.
The one you kind of get close to, not necessarily human, but depth, like that kind of depth of character or will, is Ragnar Valoris.
Well, you don't get much in the first half.
But you meet him, and there's definitely something about that guy. There's definitely something about that guy.
There's something for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the fact that he came up with a legal loophole in order to be able to pledge himself to Darrow is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. I love that guy, dude. Dude. He's such a good character.
He's a good guy. He's a good character.
And the fact that he's different, he's unique from Pax. Like, he's not the same person, but there's echoes of Pax there that you can see why Darrow becomes so attached to Ragnar, because he reminds him of that attachment he was starting to have with Pax. Because
I love that you get to see Pax's dad and brother in this book.
Yeah, you actually get to see more and more of them, if I remember right. Like they start to play a bigger and bigger role, which is cool.
Oh, they're pretty important in the book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of all I have for Between the Lines. That's kind of all I was able to find today. And we talked a good bit about the plot. Is there anything else you want to talk about within the first half?
Like we talked about earlier, I love he didn't make this first half of this book, because if he included the academy, it would have been the first half. It would have been the first half of this book, at least, right?
Yeah. I think that was a master decision on Pierce Brown's part, is to skip that part.
Starts where he is about to win the academy, and so you think he's gonna win because the book starts there. You're like, all right, sweet, he wins the academy. Literally, I was already thinking in my head. I was like, as I was reading that section, I was like, I'm glad that he didn't include the academy just for him to go win the academy. And because he's gonna win.
Because he's gonna win. Of course he's gonna win. He just came off that other victory.
Yeah, man. And then he loses, and his whole arrangement just goes to hell.
Yeah,
you get super depressed.
You get this feeling of this setting up feeling of, oh, okay, so he's gonna win this. He's going to be able to grow the army. He's going to be able to go back to the Sons of Ares. But it slowly starts to being revealed of how little contact he's had with Ares, and how not just and I mean right after you find out that he loses, you also find out Ares isn't talking to him. He doesn't. He's just kind of been left out in the cold and has got no idea how to reach them, no idea how to get in touch with them, no idea what the plan is. And he's just going. He's just doing the best he can. Oh, and I definitely what I want to talk about, because it's a good focus of the book, is the difference between his and Mustang's motivations and the rift that causes between the two of them, because they do have the same goal, changing society, changing the goal of society, but they have different ideas of what that looks like. So they talk and they agree and they discuss. They have these ideas of, okay, the world needs to change. And then Darrow goes off to the academy and it kind of shatters that relationship they have that you don't get to see because he skips all of that. And I think that's freaking genius and frustrating. I love when authors skip enough material for an entire series. Love it. So yeah, like, let's talk about him and Mustang's relationship really quick, of how differently they approach the idea of that golds need to change. You know what I mean?
So how does Mustang want it to change?
Well, she talks about how that she finds the way that they're doing the Institute wrong, that they like can't trust each other. She recognizes kind of like the fractures in the society. You know what I mean? When they were like talking in the cave and those kinds of things. And she makes mention of it when everything goes down at the summit and they finally are able to kind of talk to each other again, that she was so upset with him for going off to the academy because when they talked as if they wanted to do it differently. They wanted to behave differently. They wanted to change things. And then she saw him go off to be one of her dad's war puppets. And because when she was talking about change, she was thinking one thing, but Darrow's talking about change with a hammer, not with a chisel. Like, he's like, I'm taking a hammer to this. You want me to take a chisel, and I need a hammer to make the kinds of changes I want. We're on the same page, but we're also reading from a different book. You know what I mean? Like, we're all. Yeah, that's the best way I can think of it.
That's pretty interesting because they're drivers for the change they see necessary, for the same reason, where they want the best for their family. But Darrow wants the best for his family, which creates a decidedly different set of circumstances than Mustang wanted the best for her family.
That's very well put. That they both want the best for their family, but Darrow's family is different, and Mustang doesn't realize that. Mustang doesn't realize the macro level that Darrow is operating on. She's very much she's looking at the micro where he's looking at the macro. She thinks golds need to change. Darrow thinks everything needs to change.
The whole system.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all I've got for today. Thank you so much, Squid. If you want to go ahead and sign up.
I have one quote.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Hit us with the quote.
We don't have to get into it. But so when Darrow is down in the city, he's at the bottom rung of the city to go visit the Jackal. He doesn't know who he's going to visit yet, but that's who he ends up visiting. He has a thought: what is there to change here but everything? Because he's down at the bottom and it's gross and disgusting. And damn it, if that doesn't encapsulate a lot of the view I think people are stuck on currently for like our society. They're like pointing around. They're like, this is broken. This is broken. This is broken. This, because any direction you point, you can say this is broken. And so you get kind of stuck in this, like, I understand why someone's working to improve this because there's so much to be improved. But I think it's also important to, just because there's a lot to be done doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. And Pierce Brown tackles that pretty hard in the next couple books. I'm really excited for us to get to them. Thank you. That was a good quote. I need to make sure that should be that even part of these half weeks. We should make sure to do quotes. But I do like here. Let me go ahead and have you sign off, and then I'll sign off after you, and then we can talk a little bit more about book club moving forward.
All right. Well, I'm Squid. I hope everyone has a good night.
And I'm Drake Shadwell. Thank you for being us with Read. I'm Drake, and thank you for being with us for Read Between the Lines. We're your weekly podcast for reading behind the words and between the lines. Join Squid and I next time when we're covering a nonfiction book. Squid, can you go ahead and tell us what that is?
It is very poignant for the quote I ended on there. How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates.
So please read it or don't, but please join us, and we're going to give you a detailed synopsis and analysis of that book. I always look forward to our nonfiction series. I feel like I always learn a lot. I think I learn a lot with the fiction as well, but it's definitely in a different manner. No matter what, I hope to see you right back here next week on Twitch, where we'll be recording our next session. We'll stay tuned in our Discord to find the day and time. We're still working on getting one settled down, but we're excited for each week. So just make sure you're staying in tune in the Discord to see any scheduling changes. And if not, these are always going to be available on YouTube as I get the opportunity to edit them. So please go check them out there and share them with all of your other book lover friends. Other than that, everyone have a great night and never forget to read between the lines. And editing Drake, cut there!